He was in the third grade class I taught at St. Martin's School in Morris, Minnesota. All of my 34 students were very dear to me, but Mark Bloom was one in a million. He had an outstanding presence and a very positive and smiling attitude, which even turned his misbehaviors into something charming. Mark likes to talk a lot, and I constantly reminded him that talking without permission in the classroom was unacceptable. However, what impressed me the most was his sincere response every time I corrected him for misbehaving. "Thank you for correcting me, teacher," he would say. At first, I didn't know how to behave, but after a short time, I got used to listening to him many times a day. One morning, my patience was thin when Mark started to talk about more than I could, and then I made a beginner-teacher mistake. I looked at Mark and said, "If you say one more word, I will put tape over your mouth, so shut up." Not even 10 seconds passed when another student named Jack suddenly commented, "Mark is talking again, teacher." I hadn't asked any of my students to help me watch Mark, but since I had set up the punishment in front of the class, I had to enforce it. I remember the scene as if it happened this morning. I walked over to my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out a roll of duct tape. Without saying a word, I walked over to Mark's seat, ripped off 2 pieces of tape, and made a big X with them over his mouth. Then walked back to the front of the room, and as I glanced sideways at Mark to check on him, he winked at me. That was enough, and I burst out laughing. The class looked at me as I walked back to Mark's desk. I took the tape from him and shrugged. His first word was, "Thank you for correcting me, teacher." At the end of the school year, I was asked to teach high school math. Years passed, and before I knew it, Mark was back in my classroom. He was as handsome as ever and just as polite, but because he had to listen carefully to my instructions on the new math, he didn't talk as much in 9th grade as he did in 3rd. One Friday, things just didn't feel right. We had been working on a new project, and I felt the students weren't getting it, frustrated with themselves and tense with each other. I had to stop that before it got out of hand, so I asked each one to list the names of their classroom partner on 2 sheets of paper, leaving a blank space between each word. Then I asked them to think of the most incredible thing each of their classmates could say and write it in the empty spaces. Just as the dismissal bell rang, everyone could accomplish that task, and as the students left the classroom, they each handed me the papers. The next day, Saturday morning, I put each student's name on separate sheets of paper and then wrote below the names what their classmates had thought of them. One of my students, named Charlie, smiled. Mark, however, said, "Thank you for teaching me, teacher. Have a good weekend." When Monday came, I gave each of the students their list, and the whole class smiled before long. I seriously heard whispered, "Didn't think it would mean that to him," said one. "I didn't know he liked others so much," said another. However, no one ever mentioned those papers in class again. I never knew if they discussed them after they left school or with their parents, but the students were happy with themselves, no matter if the exercise had served its purpose. That group of students went on with their studies. Several years later, after returning from a vacation, my parents met me at the airport on our way home. Mom asked me the usual questions about my trip. How was the weather, and how was my overall experience? Suddenly, there was a pause in the conversation. Mom glanced at my dad and said, "It's time to tell him." My dad cleared his throat, as he always does before saying something important. "The Blooms called last night," he began. "Really?" I said. "I haven't heard from them in years." I asked him how Mark was doing. Dad replied sadly, "Mark died in Vietnam. The funeral is tomorrow, and his parents would like you to go." I had never seen a soldier in a military casket before. Mark looked radiant. All I could think at that moment was, "Mark, I would give all the duct tape in the world if only I could heal you." At that moment, I regretted doing what I did that time. Yes, I regretted keeping quiet. The church was full of Mark's friends. One of his buddies sang something for him. Why did it have to come on the day of the funeral? It was hard enough walking through the cemetery. The pastor said the usual prayers, there was some music, and one by one, those who knew Mark walked near the casket and said their goodbyes. I was the last, As I stood and one of the soldiers approached me, "You were Mark's math teacher?" he asked. I nodded my head as I continued to share at the casket. After the funeral, most of Mark's former classmates headed to an establishment for lunch. Mark's parents were there, obviously waiting for me. "We want to show him something," his father said. "When Mark died, they found this in his wallet. We thought maybe he would recognize it." Opening that wallet, he carefully pulled out 2 pieces of paper, and I could tell they had been taken out and folded many times. I knew without looking that the papers were what I had written, all the good things that each of Mark's classmates had said about him. "Thank you so much for doing that. As you can see, Mark appreciated it," said his mother. Mark's classmates were beginning to gather around us. Charlie smiled and said, "I still have my list. It's in my desk drawer at home." Chad's wife said, "My husband asked me to put his in our wedding album." "I have mine too," said Marvin. Then another classmate pulled her wallet out of her purse and showed her old list to the group. "I always carry this," said Vicky, adding, "I think we all still have our lists." That's when I finally sat down and cried. I cried for Mark and all his friends who would never see him again, said the teacher. This story was written by teacher Helen Mrosla and first appeared in a college magazine in Cheapsboard, Pennsylvania, the last place the woman worked. The purpose of this letter is to encourage everyone to praise the people they love and care for. Generally, we tend to forget the importance of showing our affection and love. Sometimes a minor thing can mean a lot to another person. So please tell the people you love and care for that they are unique and essential, and say it before it is too late. Thank you for watching. Do not hesitate to give us thumbs up, comment, and share. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and activate the little bell to receive the latest uploads. See you next time!